Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. And I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. We've talked a lot about circular economies. They grow from the ground up, starting from the recognition that a material used to make a product can be recaptured, reused, resold, and recycled to lower the cost of sourcing raw materials, as well as to reduce our environmental impact. Seeing these opportunities is easier at the grassroots, where small economies of scale can emerge in response to the potential for profit. And from being easier on the earth to the partnership with customers that enables the return and reuse of those feedstocks needed to make the next generation of products, there are a lot of benefits for companies that embrace a circular approach. And our guest today is Mike Baker, who founded both Sole and ReCORK. Since its founding in 2008, as a second business of the custom orthopedic insole company Sole, ReCORK has recycled an astonishing 132 million wine corks and planted more than 8,000 cork trees in support of Sole's development of a circular orthopedic shoe insole. These milestones are just a part of Sole's broader mission to reduce its environmental impact and promote sustainable practices. You can learn more about Sole, the insole company, at yoursole.com, and Sole is spelled S-O-L-E, like you would expect with a shoe. And you can learn about ReCORK at recork.com. We'll delve into the inspiration behind ReCORK, the innovative processes they use, and the positive changes they're making in the industry and beyond with Mike Baker right after this quick commercial break. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, hey, thank you. You're calling in from Vancouver. How's the weather? Are you experiencing extreme heat today?
No, it's a little drizzly, a little on the moist side of things, which I think the plants are happy about. So
I want to start off. I mean, you've got first Sole, the insole company, and then ReCORK, your cork recycling and collection program. Which came first, the cork or the idea for the sole? How did you end up with this portfolio of businesses?
yeah, well, the short answer is Sole and the insole came first. So back in about 2001, came up with the concept for this orthopedic footbed that was a solution for the back pain that I was experiencing at the time. So it was a very sort of solutions focused need that or product that I had to bring to market or something that I was searching for. And I found that what was under my feet really had a big impact on how I was feeling. And most of those solutions that did give me the impact were sort of hard to get your hands around. They were not super accessible and they were really expensive. So that led to trying to create a over-the-counter, high-quality custom orthotic or footbed, as we call it. And so that was really the genesis of Sole, was some personal struggles and personal needs that I had. And it was almost 10 years later, 8 years later, rather, that we really sort of initiated the ReCORK collection program. And all along, sort of the impetus for it was that we have an eye towards sustainability. We had a understanding inherently sort of our impact of our operations. I spent a lot of time in the factories, in our warehouses, understanding physical impact. We were starting to actually produce more notable volumes and clearly was aware that our decisions had consequences. And so we've always been sort of seeking and pushing towards finding new sustainable packaging, new sustainable materials that can go into our product. And yeah, we came across cork. There's more to talk about on that story, but in terms of the order, Sole was first, and in our search for more sustainable, natural, renewable, recyclable materials, it led us to cork.
Actually, back pain is how I discovered Sole myself. So
is that right?
You.
Okay,
that actually helped.
Good.
Made a big difference in my
great.
life. I understand you had a kind of a moment of clarity involving a cork floor. How did that notion all come together in your mind?
Yeah, it's. I was reminded of the story recently. A friend of mine has a cabin on a small island in and around the Vancouver area. It's an old panabode style cabin. It's about 75-year-old cabin, and on an annual basis, a number of my friends and families, a number of us have kids, so we would descend on this cabin for sort of an annual gathering. And you can imagine sort of the melee that would ensue of kids and animals and wet feet and spills, etc. And we'd stay overnight, and so we would experience sort of daytime, nighttime, obviously morning, and we you couldn't get away with understanding what was under our feet on that floor was something special. So from an acoustic standpoint, it was insulating. In the morning when it was cold, it was thermally insulating. When the fire was going, this floor rebounded when it experienced dents or damages, sort of self-healing in a sense. And it had been there, and I reconfirmed it again about a month ago. I mean, it's a 75-year-old floor, and obviously the punchline is that it's a cork floor, right? So it just dawned on me how resilient this material is. And I guess, if we are looking for sustainable solutions, sustain is obviously a key part of that concept and of that word. And this floor has sustained essentially untouched. And I can attest to the wear and tear and the traffic, and the beauty and the warmth, and certainly the benefit of the acoustic insulation when you have a small space with a lot of people. So this floor really still is a hero in that cabin. And also at the cabin, we would, as you may not be shocked to learn, made things go pop. There were bubbles, there were celebrations, sparkling wines, etc. And so at one point, it finally dawned on me that this amazing floor from the cork oak tree was actually the same stuff that was sealing that a bottle, sparkling in this case, and the two connected. What's so unique about the material that comes out of the top of the bottle is it's very, very lightly processed, right? So it hasn't gone through a lot of secondary modifications, alterations, etc. In the most premium bottles, in the most premium form, it's 100% pure cork that's literally just punched out of the bark of a cork oak tree with a cylindrical knife. So it is as lightly touched as you can possibly imagine, and that forms the basis of a really great, I'll call it resource recovery, recycling opportunity, and an opportunity to basically reuse it in something new when it comes to you in basically essentially a virgin form or a very lightly processed form.
Cork is a remarkable material because you can harvest it without killing the tree too. How frequently can a cork tree be harvested in terms of the initial sustainability before we talk about the recycling?
Yeah, so the cork oak forests are primarily in Portugal, about half in Portugal. Portugal is the largest supplier, then Spain, then you go to sort of northern Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and a little bit in Italy and France. And so these forests have been there for thousands of years. Ancient Greeks notably used it in fishing and buoys and floats, etc. And so this is ancient sort of generational, traditional practice of farming and coexist and living with this harmonious sort of balance of the cork oak tree, which currently by law in Portugal can only be harvested every 9 years. The average is about 10 years. And what you end up seeing is it's harvested in the springtime when a certain a layer of new growth presents itself, and artisan workers with specialized equipment and axes are able to sort of carefully peel and remove the bark from the tree without damaging the tree. So generally, the harvesting will be on the trunk and the larger limbs of the tree, not all the way out to sort of the peripheral branches. And once that's done, they'll paint the number on the tree of the date of the harvest. So it's sort of an interesting sight when you see the cork forest and you see spray painted numbers or painted numbers on the tree indicating the date of last harvest, so they can count forward to when the next harvest will be, as I said, on average about 10 years.
It's truly a managed resource in the most historic sense. What are the benefits of using cork in footwear? And I'm curious, how do you actually create the shape of an insole using cork? Is it carved, or they're in some way turned into a slurry and pressed into the form?
Well, so first of all, in terms of the benefits in footwear, so there are lots of applications that instances of use in footwear. Most people can conjure up examples in their mind. In the high end, the more luxury segment, like a Chanel or a Gucci, will use it in wedges, heels, etc. It's used in the cork fabrics used on bags, high-end bags, and they come up with lots of creative uses. If you've been to Portugal or Spain, it's in umbrellas and trivet.
Really?
So there are a lot of diverse applications. Footwear is just one of them. Some of those properties that I mentioned are, previously, in terms of its insulation and acoustic and thermal insulation, its compressibility, its lightweight is a very positive attribute. It's incredibly lightweight as a material. So those are some of the attributes that make it desirable in footwear. I would say aesthetic beauty, the fact that it's actually a natural, renewable material in itself makes it an interesting material for, again, a broad array of use cases. In terms of how it's actually processed, we know a dangerous amount about footwear, meaning not necessarily all that much, but we know enough to tune the material to the applications of footwear. So generally, there are different types of molding techniques, but ultimately what we're producing now in Portugal is a ReCORK composite that comes in sort of a granulated form that then can be used in a lot of existing manufacturing processes in the footwear industry. So generally speaking, it's a compression molding process where the granulate is placed in the mold and it's heated for a period of time, it's cooled for a period of time, and magically out pops a product.
So how does the patented technique for making ReCORK differ from working with traditional cork in production?
Yeah, what's new here? So for all the positive attributes that we can speak to of cork, it does have some trade-offs. There are some drawbacks. Some of those include, generally speaking, it can be rigid or not overly soft. It can get brittle. If anybody's ever corked a cork, meaning like it broke off or it got dry. So it's this dynamic material. So what's new with the ReCORK process is our ability to really tune the material, the finished product, to be more resilient. So if you have a trivet or a coaster, they're generally quite fragile, or have been historically. And most of the manifestations of cork use in footwear have also been quite fragile and quite hard. And so those are the two main limitations that we sort of sought to overcome. And with the new composite, we are really able to get into details around specifying the physical properties that we're trying to achieve. So if we want to have more abrasion resistance in the material, for example, such that we can make it a ground contact, like an outsole in a shoe, we're able to do that. We're also able to make it more flexible and softer into the midsole. So we're able to make a higher durability, softer, and more flexible product than was previously possible. And this opens up, again, possibilities beyond just footwear, of course. So there are applications into surf and automotive and construction where these same historical limitations inhibited the sort of full scope of options and applications to be available to the material. So it's an expansion of the physical properties of the material that allow us to address fresh new markets and bring cork into new product categories.
Now, you replaced synthetic foam in insoles and in some of your shoe products as well with cork. How does the environmental impact of the cork process that you use compare with the production of a petroleum-based foam?
So, first off, starting with a natural renewable material, we are simply swapping out one material for the other. So, in terms of volume, we're simply using less, not 100, not zero. We're up to about 70% bio-based in our composite at this point. So you end up with a 90%, a high 90% bio-based material. Ultimately, we would like to be 100% bio-based. Obviously, cork is 100% bio-based. So it's about swapping. It's about swapping out the material and using less or ultimately zero as the goal of existing synthetic foams or binders and foams. So in terms of total net impact, obviously the cork forest is in itself an amazing carbon sink, and because the tree is not cut down, you are basically extending the life cycle of the tree through its harvest, through its managed use. So you're starting from a very different place when you compare obviously materials that continue to exist and continue to maintain an ecosystem and retain carbon versus pulling materials out of the ground. So the easiest way to think about the benefit of the comparison is using less of materials that come out of the ground.
You've planted about 8,000 cork trees. I'm wondering, is the cork habitat being impacted by climate change? Is this something that we can continue to grow and use as a sustainable resource?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of obviously misunderstanding around the cork forest. Most people don't would assume that the tree is cut down. in most forestry practices. Obviously, the tree is cut down, so it's understandable why people would believe that or think that. But it's a really unique situation. The cork forest itself is thriving, is doing just fine, and new trees are being planted. Increased densification of the forest, so it's been quite lightly distributed in terms of like trees per hectare. So there are a bunch of initiatives to increase the density of trees, and the trees generally have a life cycle of about 200 plus years. So there is a natural replacement that does occur. Certainly rainfall does affect growth like it does in any ecosystem. So in terms of looking at, sequestration over time or, health of the forest, and I guess maybe more relevant is the actual growth of the bark itself. Certainly it's tracked the rainfall impacts of that, seasonally. But generally speaking, the forest is thriving and the ecosystem is thriving and healthy. And there's a lot of interest in cork because of, a lot of the reasons we've talked about thus far today. So I don't think the cork forest is going anywhere. The one challenge with the cork supply is that it is highly inelastic. And so what that, insofar as you have a surge in demand in a given year, you cannot respond and build a forest tomorrow to meet that demand. So it takes a long time to bring on supply of new material, obviously. So the first harvest in a cork tree is about 25 years. And generally it's only after the second harvest that you get high enough quality to get to the really premium stoppers.
So this is
that come out of the bark.
A generational investment by the farmer.
100%. There are a few really interesting sayings that come to mind. One is, society is improved when men plant trees in the shade of which they'll never sit. So that kind of applies to the cork forest. It's definitely a very long-term commitment to plant, initiate, grow new trees. The other saying is, if you want to make your kids wealthy, you plant eucalyptus. If you want to make your grandkids wealthy, you plant cork oak. So it takes a very, very long view to certainly create new supply.
Well, recycling the cork makes this a less inelastic resource. But I want to talk more about that after we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Now let's return to our discussion with Mike Baker, founder and CEO of Sole, a maker of cork-based custom insoles for shoes, and ReCORK, the cork collection program that provides the feedstock for Sole products. Now, Mike, you've collected more than 132 million wine corks to recycle. How did you grow the collection network to make contributing old corks so apparently easy?
Well, I'm glad it seems easy. It hasn't entirely felt easy. It's been a long-term effort. Is the short answer. I think people inherently have an affinity towards cork, and there's a lot of cultural traditions where people will sign and date, sort of memorialize, a bottle that they have with a friend. And so, and keep it, so what we find actually is when we create a new collection sort of node or location, we often have sort of a bit of an initial surge. A lot of people actually just, again, inherently, innately seem to want to hang on to cork. There's something that is attributing value to this natural raw material. When you first take the cork out of a champagne bottle, again, is a good example because it comes out in a rather unique shape, almost sort of angular or triangular in profile. And what you see over time is if you hang on to it, it actually turns out to be sort of fully cylindrical. So that's just another example of how sort of unique or special. It's fun to touch. It's almost call it the original fidget toy or something when you're sitting there at a table with a cork, and you can feel the difference in material properties, the compressibility that's higher down by the part of the cork that's been interfacing with the liquid versus the top of the cork that may be closer to exposed to the air. So the point of saying that is there's a latent or desire to actually reuse this material. So in some sense, we've been unlocking that for almost 15 years now. And what we do is we have a sales team, an outreach team, a customer service team. We put a plan in place to reach out to places, grocery stores, bars, vineyards, casinos, tasting rooms, where there would be a high concentration of cork stoppers, and we offer them the opportunity to recycle it with us. We create a map on our website, ReCORK.com, and you can go there and you can find a location, a collection partner. So we've, obviously over 15 years, we've evolved and changed and refined and hopefully improved the collection network. There's a few thousand collection partners. Anyone wanting to collect, I would definitely just encourage, make sure you call and confirm that the location is ready to accept your cork. We do our best to make sure accuracy in that collection interface and map is there, just so we ensure the integrity of it. But so building out the broader collection network, and then finding distribution centers and ways to sort of efficiently manage the inbound collection, that's been the 15-year exercise.
So if I was a bartender in a bar that was doing the collection, we'd toss it into a special bin and the cork would be collected periodically. If I'm an individual, though, do I take a bag of cork to my local bar or liquor store? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. So the collection, at a tasting room or certain bars will actually showcase the corks. They'll put it in a champagne chiller on the bar top, or so. And obviously they're collecting the bottles. The recycling is happening with other aspects of what they're processing. So we offer a box, or they can use their own box if it's sort of back of house kind of scenario. And on the individual basis, there are a few sort of mail-in programs you can access, but we do find a lot of consumers, a lot of individuals end up finding a local drop-off location. We do have some, municipal and city networks that have recycling depots that do accept the cork. So yeah, it's a complicated patchwork, and there's no consistent sort of national access points. But what we've tried to do is build that out on our own.
Can you mail them in if you don't have a local drop-off location?
Yeah, you can. I believe there are instructions on the website for that. We have collection locations, both obviously in the US, multiple collection distribution centers that will receive the cork, and also in Canada. So we generally ask that people, we provide guidelines around minimum box size. It doesn't make a lot of sense to ship a single cork or a few corks. We generally encourage people to try and get 15 pounds of cork, which is a reasonable amount of cork, but you consolidate that with a neighbor or two or family members, and you can get to that level pretty quickly, and then we'll send you a shipping label.
Do you find that people who participate in the ReCORK program are interested in what happens, and that connects them to the Soul brand and to the services that you offer there?
I think so. Of course, I hope so. I think what's unique about what we're doing here is we're handling sort of the complete chain of custody of this raw material. And for me, that's really important. I would love to see more transparency throughout our recycling collection, sort of writ large. Like, I feel that we are missing that to some degree. What actually happens at end of life in a lot of these cases. I've seen sort of a shift and I know you're an expert in this space, but we've seen the shift to, I would say evolving language, energy recovery, waste to energy is sort of sneaking in there. And I think, candidly, that's a more authentic way to talk about what's actually happening in a bunch of these cases. So I'm an advocate certainly for more transparency and more education, but it is magical to actually follow a material through a full circular path. And so we manage the material through the entire path. It's not outsourced. We don't wash our hands of it and assume something magical happens to it at the end of its life. We put it back into finished goods and use the material. So telling the entire story and being able to provide that authenticity is something I'm really proud of.
Well, and you should be, because this really is the signature of an effective recycling program, is to give people the confidence that the action they took resulted in an actual positive outcome.
For sure.
I was wondering that, can you recycle a Soul recycled cork insole? Is that something that you were able to do today?
I was going to answer yes until the last word that you said, which is today. So, a slight caveat. Ultimately, the answer is yes. And we, just this year so we've made products with cork for some time. We have not made products with our own, ReCORK composite material that we're producing now. So the first iteration of that new, softer, more flexible, the midsole that actually is very similar to what you'd be used to experiencing under your foot, as a midsole, very comparable to existing petroleum-based foams. That only launched this year. So we are still in the early stages of getting more of our own composite into the marketplace. we certainly do have an eye towards and developments in the works that will allow us to very simply recycle our own products. So we historically had a decent sandal business. We are going to be making sandals that are 100% out of our new composites, and those will be recyclable. We certainly have done some really cool proof of concepts with these where we are recycling midsoles. And
Right.
it comes out again that the authenticity of the process. It's really, really cool to end up making sheets that can be used for a lot of different applications that actually look like midsoles, look
Yeah.
like feet, right? So absolutely we can. Getting all of the processes and logistics in place to make sure that that all works definitely takes time. And how we design the product certainly is critical to the success of being able to recycle it, right? So there's the concept
Sure.
of design for disassembly is a concept that's been that's integral to making this work. So the change there is that we can be much more intentional about not just designing for disassembly, but designing for recyclability now that we have this more notable breakthrough in how we can tune the material.
As you continue to evolve the circularity of the material, do you also see new applications for ReCORK recycled cork beyond the footwear industry? Are there other areas you could use this?
Yeah, for sure. So we hope to be able to announce in the next, coming this year, some updates. Well, there's a few updates I can share right now. I like to surf. Our team in Portugal loves to surf. That's one of the benefits of being there. And I've got to tell you, when you put the cork material as decking on a surfboard, it's a beautiful experience. It's softer on your chest. It's grippy. There's a natural material in the actual structure of the cells of the cork itself that's called suberin. It's essentially like a sappy material that when wet becomes a little bit grippy. So you get a really grippy surface and you don't have to use any wax. So you don't destroy your rash guard, your wetsuit. So you can replace in a way that I think is better than the alternative, notably better than the alternative, a material on the board that gives you all of those the properties that you would otherwise have with a wax. So that's one application. Surf is a really interesting one. Surf and traction, automotive for sure, dashes.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thermal acoustic insulation. One attribute that I didn't mention is a fire resistance is a thermal resistant. So cork doesn't burn. It was actually used on the nose cone of the space shuttles, previous generation of spacecraft. So for on reentry. So it's a bit of a super material. And the applications are diverse. So surf, automotive, aerospace, possibly. Yeah, there are a number of applications and market verticals that are unlocked as a result of this sort of material breakthrough.
Well, now, and you make sandals and you're making shoes now. What other areas do you expect Sole to expand into as you apply that cork material in more ways?
Sole is focused on footwear and foot health, and that's the area that we're going to continue to focus on and innovate on the Sole side. ReCORK runs under, it's a separate company. It runs under a different name for that purpose. We see it as a component brand that can be used into footwear. So we are absolutely open to and working with other partners to make the technology available into their offerings, and that applies across industries. So not just footwear, but into automotive and surf, as I mentioned.
Because you've mastered this hard to recycle materials process, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who may be looking at other materials that are out there? You've called out during this conversation that there are a lot of things that are hard to recycle, or at least you don't have any idea what happens once you put it in the recycling program. What do you suggest somebody think about if
Right.
they see an opportunity to make a recycling business, whether part of a production company like you're doing or just for its own purposes?
There's a few things that I would say. I think having a long-term view, I think that we have become really short-term focused in a lot of our actions. And I think to do this right, you need to have a much longer-term horizon around planning, architecting an ecosystem that can actually truly be circular and sustainable. So I think a short-term view is almost certainly likely to fail. It's complicated. It's complicated moving waste materials around the world. COVID certainly, caused lots of spanners in the works in lots of degrees. Freight costs specifically, shipping costs, went up enormously. Like moving a container around the world. Say the average
Yeah.
from Asia to to the west coast of North America was 2,000. It went to 25,000 during COVID. So the input costs can change, and aberrations could certainly impede and damage your success on the journey to try and create a recycling initiative. I think the other thing is goes back to the design for disassembly kind of concept. You need to go almost one level up from that, a little bit more meta. You need to think about the inherent value of the natural raw material, right? So for a recycling program or a circularity program to be successful, you have to start with a material that's valuable. If you don't have a valuable material in the first place, it's not going to be sustainable, because ultimately you come back to this idea of resource recovery. If you can't sustain the processing and the recovery of this resource, it's going to be a vanity product or project rather, or it's not going to ultimately stand the test of time, because it's going to be hard to continue to fund and weather some of those other aberrations that certainly come and can hit you in the short term. And then I would say maybe the third thing I would suggest is that the raw material that you go after should be a lightly processed material. You have to consider how you're going to recycle it, and how complicated is it to recycle in the first place. One other example that I would say is somewhat analogous to our cork recycling initiative. I've seen it here locally in Canada where I am. I don't know if they're international or not, but was an initiative around chopsticks, for example. And what's that kind of fits the bill in a few respects. It's a very lightly processed raw material that's basically being ignored or being tossed. So it's not hard to grab that material and process it. It's not filled with nails, it's not filled with chemicals, it's not, so it's a relatively virgin raw material. So I think really spending the time to consider what the actual material you're interested in recycling is, that allows you to do the thought experiment of running it through all steps in a circularity process, really consider every node of the process and where you're going to get to in the end.
Do you see the circular economy as something that can be implemented from the top down, or does it really need to grow from the bottom up, pieced together, basically in the way that you put together ReCORK?
I think all links in the chain are important. So certainly could we do it without the consumer? We certainly couldn't do it without human involvement. At some point you need participation in the program, right? So I think that obviously the more engagement that you can get from the bottom up, that's going to be a support in terms of filling in the entire chain of the circle, if you will.
So Mike, how can folks follow your work?
I would say the best way, we have relative, social media channels. Website is active, yoursole.com, yoursole.com, and at ReCORK. So we have an active blog. We active on the social channels as well, and you can find links to them on both those websites.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
That was my conversation with Mike Baker, founder and CEO of the ReCORK Recycling Network, and also the CEO of Sole, which makes cork-based custom insoles for shoes, as well as shoes and sandals that feature cork. You can learn more about ReCORK at recork.com, and to check out Sole, visit yoursole.com. Your Sole is all one word, no space, no dash, yoursole, SOLE.com. Mike's comment about the importance of the consumer or the business that uses a recyclable material is critical to the conversation society is having about its environmental impact. Too often we hear that one side of this equation, the manufacturer or the consumer, is responsible all by themselves for recycling. But in fact, it is a partnership that cannot succeed if the first step, putting the material back into the system for recycling, is not taken at the home or office. And ReCORK found a way to make that step easier for bars, liquor stores, and consumers. But as Mike said, that first step must be followed by careful management of the material, including designing it to be easily deconstructed for processing into a reusable feedstock for the next round of products. And that story of the journey a cork or a PC or an aluminum can takes through the recycling system is important to share transparently so that people and businesses can recycle with confidence. It takes time, that is, taking the time to recycle, which is always in short supply. Therefore, it's critical to let every participant in the circular economy know that their efforts were worthwhile. So check out ReCORK and start recycling your corks, folks. We can keep that material in use for generations of products. I hope to take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 480 interviews that we've done on sustainability in your ear with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that can help spread more ideas to create less waste. So let folks know that you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the fine purveyors of podcast goodness that you prefer. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.